them. And then I think people are waiting to see if it's safe. And I do think we will get there, but it's work. It's hard work.
So what?
Hello, thank you for joining us. It was described as a day of rage, but the first general strike in Palestinian territories for decades has ended with further violence and bloodshed. 4 people were killed and more than 160 injured in the occupied West Bank when protests that began with stones thrown and tear gas deployed descended into reported use of live ammunition by both sides. 2 Israeli soldiers were also wounded. There's also been no end to the Israeli bombardment of Gaza, with more airstrikes and rockets returning in the other direction after only a brief overnight pause. In all, 217 people have now been killed in Gaza, 61 of them children, with thousands more injured and homeless. 12 people have been killed in Israel, including 2 children. Now, while the toll from the violence mounts, there was hope of a breakthrough to the humanitarian crisis, with Israel agreeing to open a border crossing for aid deliveries. But it was quickly closed. Well, Palestinians protested near an illegal Israeli settlement close to Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Al Jazeera's Nida Ibrahim was interviewing a protester live on air when the afternoon gunfire broke out.
What makes you think that protests... Nida, we're seeing crowds are leaving. We're not sure what's going on.
That confrontation a little earlier on today. At least 3 people were killed in confrontations there when Israeli forces opened fire on the demonstration. Both the protester being interviewed and Al Jazeera's Nida Ibrahim were safe. And Nida has continued reporting from Ramallah. This is her latest report.
4 Palestinians were killed on Tuesday, 3 of them in the confrontations we've seen in different cities in the occupied West Bank. The 4th has been killed by Israeli forces' fire in the morning in Hebron, and the Israeli army says that he attempted to carry out an attack against the Israeli forces that are near the Ibrahimi Mosque there. But the rest were killed in these confrontations that we've seen erupt in different cities in the West Bank. And the most intense of those was at the northern entrance of Ramallah. This is near the illegal settlement of Beit El, where we've also witnessed an exchange of fire between what we believe are Palestinian fighters and the Israeli soldiers. But in general, the use of live ammunition has been intensifying by the Israeli forces even before we witnessed that exchange of fire. And we've seen dozens of Palestinians being injured. Some were carried by ambulances to the hospitals, some by private cars.
Well, there were also violent confrontations between Israeli security forces and Palestinian protesters in Bethlehem in the occupied West Bank. Harry Fawcett has more.
There have been a group of Palestinian youth here very close to an Israeli military post. They've been throwing stones, and right now the Israeli army have moved in and they've managed to get 1 of the men involved. So throughout the day, this is what we've been seeing, these sort of skirmishes where stone throwers will get quite close, within a few dozen meters of this military position built in to the separation wall between the occupied West Bank and Israel, and they have now come in to arrest or at least detain one of those stone throwers. Earlier they rushed them and they took up a sniper position on the road in front of us. This follows a long afternoon, hours worth of protests and confrontations here in Bethlehem. Bethlehem often sees these sorts of scenes at times like this. It has been through 18 months of COVID restrictions, which have really devastated the tourist-heavy economy. It's been through more than 50 years of occupation, of course, and so these frictions, these confrontations between Israelis and Palestinians often take place here. And of course, all of this now being fueled as well by what we've been seeing in Jerusalem and Gaza in recent days.
Well, Israel's prime minister has warned the military operation against Hamas in Gaza will continue.
Our enemies see what price we are charging for the aggression against us. I am sure they will learn the lesson. We will continue the operation in Gaza no matter how long it takes. We took on Hamas years back, and the enemies around us are learning their lessons of what we can do to them if they dare to attack us.
Well, Imran Khan is in southern Israel. We're going to have an update from him a little later. First, though, let's go to Safwat Al-Kalut in Gaza. Safwat, we are hearing that the Israeli military has warned of its plans to target other locations, new locations in Gaza. What else can you tell us?
Well, from what we see here from Gaza, after 9 days of reporting, we could see that most of the targets, specifically those in the last couple of days, most of them are governmental buildings, security buildings, empty training camps belong to Palestinian fighting groups. But in the first days of escalation, we could see that most of the targets were residential buildings, including Hanadi building, which is full floor, and Al Jazeera building, Al Jala'wan, and some more others in Al Wahda neighborhood, where 46 Palestinians has been killed. From here, we could report about these targets that were targeted by the Israelis. On the other hand, we could say that in the last couple of days, the strength of the fire, although it's still the same, but the targets have been, the targets are different from the previous days of escalation. The previous days, or the first days, they were targeting residential buildings, residential compounds, but now the fire is more intensified on offices, security bases, and police, and so on. But still also, even the Palestinian fighting groups also, they reduced the level of fire. Today, for example, they used more mortar shells towards Israeli soldiers stationing across the borderline with Gaza, which is something unusual in comparison with the previous days. Also, go back to the humanitarian condition, which is deteriorating because of the 9 days of Israeli escalation on Gaza. The Minister of Health says that so far more than 1,500 Palestinians have been injured, and that the hospitals of Gaza are not able to deal and treat such huge number that is beyond all the capacity of the Ministry of Health itself. And so a number of them have been sent to Egypt to receive the medical treatment. They also said that yesterday one of the labs, the COVID-19 labs, well, the only one actually, COVID-19 lab have been seriously damaged, and they had to stop all the COVID-19 tests and follow-up. Also, they said that the department of COVID-19 in the hospitals is turned into injured people reception. I mean by injured people, those who were injured in the 9 days of escalation. They have been appealing the international community and the humanitarian organizations to send and to provide the medical sector with the medical supplies that are running out from the Gaza hospitals. Also, thousands of Palestinians, they have to leave their homes, or they were forced to leave their homes because of the heavy bombing near the borders between Gaza and Israel, and now taking UN schools for sheltering. So in general, there are other humanitarian crises also rising, including electricity, water supply, water desalination, sewage, etc.
Many aspects to the suffering of the people of Gaza right now. Safwat Al-Kalut with the latest from Gaza. Safwat, thank you. Well, earlier, Israel opened the Karam Abu Salim border crossing in the southernmost corner of Gaza, which is near the border with Egypt. Now, it means that aid can now flow into Gaza, a move that was welcomed by the UN. But so far, only fuel supplies have made it in.
With the opening of Karim Shalom crossing today, it has allowed dozens of fuel trucks from UNRWA to enter Gaza. Regrettably, other essential humanitarian cargo was unable to cross. It is critical that the Erez crossing is also open for the entry and exit of critical humanitarian staff. Humanitarian access into and out of Gaza for staff and goods must be sustained and appropriate measures taken to ensure safe movement within Gaza. Overnight, we received extremely worrying reports of additional civilian infrastructure being hit in Gaza, including in the central COVID-19 testing lab and other health and humanitarian facilities. In addition, we continue to receive reports of significant displacement of Palestinians within the Gaza Strip.
Let's go to Al Jazeera's Imran Khan now, who is in southern Israel. Well, let's follow on from the temporary opening of that border crossing, because aid, of course, is urgently needed in Gaza right now, but so far it's just not been able to get through.
Well, what happened has been a very confusing situation all around. It began in the early hours of the morning where some aid was able to get through. But before that happened, the Israeli army released a statement saying the barrier into Gaza was shut. Nothing was going to get through. That was very quickly followed by a statement saying, well, actually, we're in discussions to get aid through. Now, there were a number of trucks the United Nations sent into the Karim Abu Salam crossing. Some of those trucks are still there, we understand. They weren't able to cross once the barrier was shut. Now, we don't know what happened, but at some point in the afternoon, 3 Jordanian army mobile medical hospitals came straight past us, but they didn't even make it as far as the crossing. They got about half a mile down the road, which is just down that way, and they stopped and they were turned around and they went back. Now, we tried to speak to the driver to understand what had happened. The Israeli police simply moved us on, saying we weren't allowed to speak to the driver. I spoke to a senior UN source who told me there's no more aid getting into Gaza. We simply haven't been able to get it through. What happened today is there was sustained bombardment from the Israelis by air, land and sea. That was followed by rocket attacks from Gaza coming in. Now, what was happening there was really interesting because we saw rockets coming. They were intercepted by Iron Dome, the so-called rocket defense system, but still 10 people were injured. 2 of those actually died of their injuries. They were farm workers. We also heard that 2 soldiers in separate incidents had been injured. One of those was actually at that border as the barrier crossing into Gaza. Whether that played into the Israelis' decision not to let the aid in, we're not sure. But remember, this aid isn't a magic wand. It's not going to immediately solve all of Gaza's needs. It's simply a trickle, and everybody in the humanitarian community that we've spoken to has used that exact words, a trickle. Now, as all of that has been going on, we've been hearing from the Israeli military spokesman who said Tuesday into Wednesday there's going to be an unprecedented strike force on Gaza, and they'll be targeting areas that they haven't targeted before.
Worrying development there. Imran Khan with the latest there from southern Israel. Imran, thank you. Now, the most senior Palestinian diplomat to the UN has urged the international community to recognize his people's right to resist the Israeli occupation.
Often you hear some saying Israel has the right to defend itself. What rights do we have? Do we have the right to resist occupation? Do we have the right to go to Al-Aqsa Mosque and to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and exercise our freedom of religion without oppression? So those who lecture to us about human rights, then look at what is happening to the vulnerable Palestinian people who are saying enough is enough.
Well, protests against Israel's actions are gathering momentum around the world. Libyans have joined global solidarity rallies for Palestine. Hundreds of students, as well as people living in the capital, have demonstrated in front of Tripoli's university. They're demanding an immediate end to Israeli violence and the forced expulsions of Palestinians from their ancestral homes, from Israelis from their ancestral